I can't really go into detail on how great Berserk is without dropping some spoilers, so consider this your last warning if you haven't already read the manga and are sensitive to those. And if you don't plan to read it, at least watch the original show from 1997, since there will be some major spoilers from the first arc which that covers. And trust me, it's worth a watch. I remember back when I was like 9 or 10 and I went with my mom and dad to the sci-fi convention here in Sweden, and with me home I got a DVD. A round object, a disc with videos on it for those zoomers of you out there. And on it were 4 episodes from different anime shows. It was kinda intended to be a trial on anime, you could say. And it was also my first interaction with anime, if you don't count the children's shows we all watched, like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is this a appropriate time for the Avatar debate? Jokes aside, one of the 4 episodes on that disc was Berserk, and I remember I thought it was really cool until their camp was raided and everyone was eaten by monsters. Now, I don't know if I'll find the picture, but especially the guy hanging upside down telling Ricker to run and then getting eaten. That shit traumatized me as a kid. Now, I liked the other episodes though, and so it became my behelit for anime, my egg of weeb, sealing my fate as a degenerate for life. And now I revisited Berserk as an adult, which probably was a good thing considering how dark it is, and quite honestly, I don't think I would understand it as well as I did reading it today. Not gonna lie though, I did use some lore videos and timeline videos to refresh my memory for this episode. So it's no understatement to say that Berserk is the darkest of dark fantasies. How dark? Well...
No! God, please, no! No! No!
And that's just the backstory, folks. But as horrendous as it gets from time to time, I could not help but turn page after page, chapter after chapter, until far too late in the night. I can't count the amount of hours of lost sleep this manga has given me, and for every page I turned it grew more and more on me. And when the Kushan Empire started playing a role in the story, it was starting to be a serious contender for my previous #1 spot, the Warhammer universe. And this is where I have to admit, I'm doing my YouTube apology video speedrun edition. I was clickbaiting in the title. Berserk is my favorite manga universe, my second favorite fantasy universe, and one of my favorite fantasy stories, making it close. But if someone with a gun against my head forced me to choose between the Berserk and Warhammer universe, I would have to pick Warhammer. I'm sorry. Berserk is a low fantasy horror setting, or, well, to be fair, it's kind of a story that follows how the world changes from a low to a high fantasy setting, while Warhammer has its fair share of horrors, which, if you're interested, by the way, I can recommend one of my favorite Warhammer stories, The Origin of Skaven. I'll link it down below. Its universe is self-aware in how extreme it is, and it gives us both the scary, horrendous things, but also things like Grom the Paunch, Nurgle, and Skaven, which are Ratmen, by the way, and a story about them trying to blow up the moon. Not gonna spoil if they succeed or not, but my point is they are 2 very different settings in mood. Berserk is one of despair, while the best way to describe Warhammer is that it's, well, Warhammer. Speaking of despair, we have so far gone into a bit of Guts' backstory as a mercenary in the war between Midland and Shudder in their 100-year war, and as many fucked up things that happen.
No! God!
It's nothing compared to what's to come. This is a universe ridden by war after all, and it's full of mercenaries, religious extremists, and the occasional demon, even if that becomes more relevant together with other monsters as the story continues. Now, let me ask you a question. You are leading one of the most famous and skilled mercenary groups in the country. So skilled in fact you get promoted to knights. You have been destined with the Behelit, or Beherit as it's also called, the egg of the king, and whoever holds it, it's destined to rule the land. To be fair, I should even call it a Crimson Behelit, which is a super Behelit of sorts. It allows you to become one of the god hands, but more on that later. Everything is going well, and you're even starting to become friendly with the local princess, meaning you might even become ruler of this nation one day. Then your best friend decides to leave. Nothing personal, mate, just something he has to do. You get depressed though. Decide to overstep your boundaries with the princess. You'll understand what I mean, it's like he does no advertisement friendly things to her, with consent at least. You get thrown into jail and tortured to the point where you can barely move for a year. You start seeing visions of mysterious figures, not knowing if they're real or if it's your insanity taking a hold of you. Meanwhile, your best friend is out there enjoying his life, training to become stronger than ever, learning more about himself, and then you get rescued by your old comrades and your friends. Happy at first, but then you realize that all your dreams are now gone. You will never rule a nation, never fight again, or walk for that matter. And to top it off, the girl who was into you is now together with your best friend. Needless to say, life sucks right now. And that's when a group of strange and honestly pretty horrifying beings approach you, saying you can turn into a demon, and in the process get everything you lost and more, in return for your comrades. Would you take the deal? Well, Griffith, the character in this case, does, and so the eclipse happens once again as it's destined to every 216 years, and so a new god hand is born, and the sacrifices get marked with the brand of sacrifice. Almost everyone gets killed then and there. The only two survivors are Guts, who loses an arm, and Casca, which gets no-no'd without consent this time by Griffith to spite Guts. Once again, keeping it advertisement friendly for our YouTube overlords, our YouTube god hands. You could also theorize that the no-no is to further abandon his humanity, which seems to be the reason the Behelit requires a sacrifice. Casca and Guts do survive though, saved by Skull Knight, another mysterious figure in the world of Berserk. They are left branded and destined to be hunted down by demons every night until they kill them. And this is where Causality gets thrown into the picture, and yes, I did pronounce that right, I even checked it up just to be sure. I actually am not sure if that's the correct one, but that's what Google Translate said to me, so I'll trust them. So for those of you who don't know what it is, it's a philosophical idea that edgy young adults use after being introduced to philosophy, and they do this to claim that man doesn't have free will. Jokes aside, as accurate as that might be, the theory also kinda makes sense. Let's explain with an example. You are in the candy lane in the grocery store and are thinking whether to get something sweet like a chocolate bar, or if you are more into the mood for something salty like a bag of chips. Even if it feels like you're making a choice then and there between the chocolate bar and the chips, the idea of causality builds on that your previous actions have already made you choose the chocolate bar. You just don't know it yet. And in Berserk's case, these Behelit's roles seems to at least partially be to make sure that destiny does happen, and you choose the chocolate bar. Guts' role in the story in that sense is to go against fate, which, ironically enough, if it is causality going on, it would mean that that's Guts' fate, like that's his actions, like he's part of that. On a quick side note here on the lore before we continue, we have the famous Lost episode, which says that while Griffith is transforming into a demon, he meets the idea of evil. However, I would leave it as an alternative lore piece, since it did get pulled from the manga. But then again, we also know he did say that like it was pulled because it would have made it too obvious. So I do think his idea somewhere along the line was that, but as I said, we'll leave that as an alternative lore piece for now, because it did get pulled. Now, the eclipse creates a turning point in this story, and it's nothing short of a tragedy comparable to the eclipse that it's right here the old anime stops and the new one begins. Because unless you can endure the 3D animation, the only option left is to read the manga. Now, 3D animation in anime is a topic for another day, but the new Berserk anime is the bad type of 3D anime. And it's sad because that means a lot of non-manga readers will never experience the greatness that is Berserk past Eclipse. Speaking of, with only a few places left safe protected by elves and or the fact elves used to live there, Casca has now, due to her no-no trauma, which you know what that means, regressed into an infantile and largely mute amnesiac. That's a lot of fancy words, that's how she got described on the wiki, but essentially she's kinda brain dead and acting like a child. So Guts leaves her at one of these safe places, Goda's Mine, in order to be able to take revenge on Griffith. And so the Golden Age ends with a big bang and the Age of the Black Swordsman begin. So far, Berserk universe is a low fantasy setting, but the eclipse marks a turning point where monsters become a more common occurrence in the world, at least that is the feeling we get. And as Guts travels the world, he meets his first new companion, Puck the Fairy. Puck is being tortured by some random thugs in a bar when Guts saves him, so he follows Guts on his travels. Puck's job is to keep the show from getting too depressed and constantly breaks the fourth wall for our amusement, even at one point stating just that if he disappeared, the story would be too depressing. And oh boy is he right, because the next bad guy we meet is the Count, who enjoys torturing people, cutting off their body parts, and eating them. All this after getting another one of these behemoths. At this point in the story, it's quite clear that the behemoth's purpose is to summon the god hands and are appearing with people that have the potential to become apostles, and that by becoming an apostle it makes people become more wicked and evil. We also later see that the behemoths can summon the god hands more than once, as long as this is the greatest desire that summons them, and as long as you're willing to sacrifice something that is part of your humanity. And you thought that was bad? Just wait till his non-human form shows. Eventually, after a lot of fighting, the Count is given an option: sacrifice his daughter, just like Griffith sacrificed his men, and become a demon, or be absorbed by demon kind. The Count is unable to respond and so is dragged down to the Vortex of Souls, or as I call it, Hell, because that's essentially what it is. Showing that if you summon the god hands and fail to provide a sacrifice, you instead will be the sacrifice. On a side note here, we have only seen apostles and branded be dragged down to hell, so it could be that those who refuse to use the behemoth for the first time, in doing so never touch that realm and are free to refuse. Anyways, this is the type of dread that constantly exists within Berserk, this relation between humans and demons, and how awful and horrifying demons and apostles truly are. I read this YouTube comment, I can't remember the name of the guy who wrote it, but I did think it summarized Berserk well. Some fantasy universes talk about an absolute evil. Berserk shows that absolute evil. And no, I'm not talking about the idea of evil as I previously mentioned. I'll leave that as an alternative lore piece since it was cut from the manga. The next arc, or I guess story, speaking about evil, is the Fairy Apostle, and it's the darkest arc in my opinion, and as much as I want to go into detail about all the gruesome things that happen, I do want you to experience for yourself. This arc plays an important part of the universe for another reason though. This is when another force enters the story. So far it's been demons and apostles versus humans, and a lot of humans versus human war. But now the Holy Iron Chain Knights step into the picture, a religious group of knights, and they are in pursuit of the Black Swordsmen, which after all that has happened have left quite a carnage behind them, especially after this arc. Speaking of, Guts is starting to question his own sanity. The Black Swordsman is getting haunted by his own demons in the day, telling him that if he continues this way he will be overtaken by the Beast of Darkness, and in so becoming his own type of monster. A theme that continues throughout the rest of the story, and is also nicely themed with the power-up he gets later. And as the story continues, he meets new friends, but also many new enemies. A personal favorite is Moskus, one of the chief inquisitors of the Holy See. The Holy See is the religious organization. Moskus is in his own head a servant of God, and in reality is one of the most cruel villains so far, leading a torture squad. And when he is chosen to be an apostle, instead of thinking some type of devil trickery is at play, he is convinced that this power has been given to him by God to punish heretics. Once again, I will let you experience that firsthand if you haven't already, and as the story progresses, monsters become more and more common. And with monsters becoming more common, we have amongst other things an arc which is all about how the group helps out a village that's being raided by trolls. But of course, it's not just like Midland is being affected, other parts of the world is as well. Kushan enters the story, I think I'm pronouncing that right, like the Haradim with war elephants, but also unlike the Haradim from Lord of the Rings with floating yogis that can summon demons to fight for them, amongst other supernatural things. And it's this escalation of fantasy and the following power struggle that makes the universe go from interesting to amazing. Meanwhile, with monsters entering the world, it also becomes a struggle to maintain order, villages that get raided by elves and trolls, so on and so forth. Now, this video is starting to go on for too long for my schedule. There's plenty more I would like to cover. The Behemoth Apostle that wants to sacrifice itself for a perfect world, who is God, the new gods versus the old spirits, the Berserker armor which I mentioned previously, Skull Knight and his Sword of Actuation, I think that's how you pronounce it, but whatever. There won't be enough time to cover everything. And lucky for you, there are plenty of good lore videos for those of you who are interested. Or just read the manga yourself for that matter. In fact, you probably need the lore videos afterwards anyways. Anyways, that's all for now. I know you heard this a million times, Please do like, subscribe, share with a friend if you liked it. It helps a lot. Bye!